Hi everyone, how are you? I want to welcome you to Beyond Superheroes, Dynamic Characters in Comic Books. And I believe that my panelists will be joining in just a moment. So if you just hold on one moment. And here we have Karen Green. Karen, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself while everyone else is joining?
Oh, sure. I'm the curator for comics and cartoons at Columbia University's Rare Book and Manuscript Library.
Great, thanks. Thank you for being here today with us.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect timing. Fabrice Sapolsky,
Hi.
welcome. Would you
Hi.
like to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about your interest in comics and your work?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm Fabrice. I'm a comic book creator, writer, artist, editor, publisher. I created this company called Fair Square Comics that is publishing beautiful books right now. It's a minority and diversity owned company, minority and immigrant owned company, because we're talking about diversity. That's why I was confused. And I have now two books on shelves. One is called Noir is the New Black. We're going to talk about it. It's a collection of 16 noir stories from Black creators, where I have Melody, which will be with us in a minute. And the other is Intertwine, and it's a journey into a hero's life from the perspective of an immigrant. That comes out next week in stores. And apart from that, I'm also the co-creator of a Marvel character called Spider-Man Noir. So
Wow.
That's what I'm doing. Comics
Great.
night and day.
Thanks very much. And now we've been joined by Melody Cooper. Welcome, Melody. If you'd like to go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your work, that would be great.
Oh, great. Well, I am new to comic books, really. I'm a writer of TV, theater, film, and TV. I came to comic books actually working with Fabrice on Omni from Humanoids. And I wrote volume 2, so issues 5 through 10, which was an amazing experience as my first comic book. And again with Fabrice on Noir is the New Black, where I was asked to write one of the stories, which my story is Igbo Landing. And on the TV side, I started out in the HBO writing program. I just finished the Sundance Episodic Lab, and I worked on Two Sentence Horror Stories as my first TV show, and then on Law and Order SVU for a season, last season. And I'm now writing a feature for Netflix, which is a genre feature, a fantasy feature. And I'm developing a series for Will Packer.
Wow, great. Sounds very busy. Perfect timing. Everyone's joining just as we get to them. Welcome, Ray.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks. If possible, we were hoping you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in comics. But if you want me to come back to you, that's fine too.
You can, that's fine. My interest in comics, I used to work in a comic book store as a kid. I've always read and wrote comic books. And I went to college for comics at School of Visual Arts. I studied under Denny O'Neil and Howard Post and Carmen Infantino. And I started self-publishing in 2000 and still self-publishing today.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Published books. The latest one was Bronx Heroes in Trumpland, which was published by Arsenal Pulp Press. And I created the only autistic character and the first autistic character for Archie Comics with Nancy Silbercleat about 3 years ago, which is a book called Scarlet.
Wonderful. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to be doing a mix of questions from me and questions from the audience. So I will be monitoring the comments from the audience and bringing in questions if anybody would like to ask them. But to start with, let's talk about, the topic today is Beyond Superheroes. So for each of you, why Beyond Superheroes? Why is that important to you, would you say? And we can start with Fabrice, if that's okay. I think you're on mute.
I was saying, why me? Why me first? Um,
Sorry.
so, beyond superheroes, there's life, and there are a bunch of great creators doing a lot of things. I love that. I love what I think you guys are familiar with a creator named Amy Chu, and Amy has she displays a table at shows where she says comics are a medium, not a genre. And I think that in the same ballpark, there's a big confusion between superheroes and comics. Comics are not superheroes and vice versa. Comics are a medium where every genre can live. And superheroes are a big chunk of it because in North America, that's the dominant family. But it's less and less true year after year. And we have a lot of slice of life, a lot of middle grade, young adult, original stories from all across the board that are very different. So yes, there's life beyond superheroes, and we love it.
Great. Melody, would you like to go next?
Yeah, for me that's interesting because that can be interpreted in different ways. And because I'm from outside of the comic book world originally, but I grew up reading comic books. My brother worked at Marvel, so it's kind of like in my blood. But I think the thing that is interesting is the way in which comic books have, as Fabrice said, it's inclusive. It's inclusive of different styles, different ways of telling stories. And I think of it, because I work in also TV, film, and theater, it's all about storytelling. And so it's a storytelling medium, which means you can tell a story that's totally just a romantic thriller and tell that in comic book. You could tell a science fiction story that's Afrofuturism. You could tell a horror tale. There's so many different stories you can tell, but it's just one more beautiful, very visual, dramatic medium that we can tell stories. And that's what's exciting to me, because I'm a very visual storyteller, even when I'm writing plays, and that's what the core of what I do is just tell stories. So comic book, I think, is definitely inclusive of superheroes, but beyond that.
Great. Karen, I know you have maybe a little bit of a different perspective working as I do in libraries, so I'd love to hear what you think of why it's important to go beyond superheroes as well in comics.
First of all, I want to second Fabrice's point about superheroes being just a single genre in a medium that embraces as many genres as any other medium does. And I also want to thank him for bringing up it's a medium, not a genre, which is something I go through a lot. And I also Fabrice said everything I want to say, basically. I also want to say that that conflation of superheroes and comics is incredibly often. It's found incredibly often, and journalists, for example, will talk about the prevalence of comics in movies, and they are only talking about superhero movies, or they're only talking about superhero comics, and it's very frustrating. I think people often forget that while superheroes did to a certain extent kick off and bring to prominence the comic book medium, there were always countless genres in addition to superheroes. There were westerns, and there was horror, and there was occult, and there was crime, and a lot of those actually disappeared when the code was put into enforcement. So from the mid-50s onwards, you see a little bit more narrowing. And what's been marvelous in my experience is seeing all these new publishers kind of popping up in the last 10, 20 years who are going back to all of this incredible variety of genre. And when you do have this variety of genre, you can have greater diversity within it.
Definitely. Ray, how about you? For you, why is it important to go beyond superheroes?
Well, what inspired me to want to get into comics actually wasn't, even though I worked at a comic book store as a kid, it wasn't the superheroes that made me want to to the comics. It was when I discovered Robert Crumb and S. Clay Wilson and Spain. Books were, like World War III comics and Raw and all these underground books, heavy metal. Those are the books that really inspired me to want to become an artist. But being an American, and trying to break in as an indie publisher, even going to shows, everyone had that stigma towards comic books that were non-superhero. And they were like, well, this is a family-oriented show. You can only have certain types of genres or certain types of... So I felt peer pressured and boxed into this superhero world where I then began drawing superhero comic books. But for me, I was being sarcastic. I wasn't doing the typical superhero book. But people, I guess they never figured that out. Now I'm kind of stuck in the superhero thing, and I'm trying to get myself back out. So I started doing Brother Lone Star, which is a Western, about 2 years ago, and Edgar Allan Poe book. So Brother Lone Star is about a Western. It's a Western about the rodeo masters, and it still has an action flair, like the traditional Joe Kubert and Carmen Infantino and Kirby comic books on Westerns, like Bullseye and a lot of those Western comics. It's still people attention to it. I always use the historical aspect to it. So I always try to take real people for the comics and then try to inspire people that way and say, well, this is something that really happened. So telling like semi-autograph, like biographical comics, but adding a twist of fiction to it, just to capture those people who do love superheroes. So it's kind of like a delicate balance. So that's how I got around it.
Definitely. And that's a great segue into my next question, which is, we've talked about how comics are really a medium, and you've talked about, Ray, some of the genres you like doing. What, for others here, are some of your favorite genres to work in, read, study? And Melody, maybe we could start with you.
Well, for me, definitely a combination of horror and sci-fi. I was, weaned on both of those when I was growing up, and had a great science fiction library at home. My dad was a science teacher, and my mother was an English teacher. So, and wanted to be a librarian actually at one point when she was growing up. So we had a great host of books and for me to read. And then I watch a lot of television and film. So those two genres, but also thriller and I'm a huge history buff as well. So like Ray, I like to kind of wrestle with especially social issues and actual real life situations that affect especially marginalized people, and take historical fact and kind of weave that into what I write. So so I kind of have those are the genres that most interest me.
Great. Fabrice, how about you?
I guess I'm a little bit like Melody. That's why we're friends. I'm also a history buff, and I graduated. I mean, I have a degree in history, so this is where I'm coming from. And I guess I like street level stories, hence my passion for noir. I like all these stories that like can fall through the crack of real history and open doors for creativity. And I guess like I'm a big what if this happened? What if we got this? And now it's even more fascinating because my son is also a history buff, and we can have those conversations. And sometimes from these conversations, stories are born. I'm working on a vampire project right now that came exactly from that. It came from it came from a historical, like a tiny historical fact that has blossomed into this incredible story. And I'm going to explore another genre that I've never tackled before, which is the vampire thing, and also another style because I'm collaborating with an artist that is more of a manga style artist. So it's going to be very different in terms of storytelling. It's going to be very different in terms of theme. And I think that when you're a creator, you shouldn't close any doors to anything and put yourself in danger. Like, what am I going to create next? And always leave room to surprise yourself with everything that your mind can come up with. And that's why, like, going from, I would love to do a romantic comedy. I want to do a doctor, like medical drama. I want to do all this. And like, I'm very hungry as a creator, and I guess as creators we have to stay hungry and look out for the best stories regardless of the setting.
Definitely. And I really think that also goes
Agreed.
back to what you were saying about the concentration on superheroes being particularly in specific countries, like in the US and perhaps in the West, because there are other places in the world where it's much more common to see all the different genres you were talking about, you know, medical
Correct.
settings or romance
Yep.
settings.
Yeah, in Japan or in Korea,
Exactly.
or Italy, you have stories about everything. Like, if it's just one ingredient of a recipe, you will have, if it's a comic about rice, you have a copyright rice. You have I saw a whole Korean book that was about fish, a whole book, like a whole comic book about fish, from fishing to the plate, and how you explore the oceans to find this fish. And I was fascinated by the quality of that thing. And that's how it is. This is how comics are so universal that you can apply them to everything.
Exactly.
It's like a window.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So Karen, what genres are your favorites?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm really a fan of the medium, and I will read in nearly every genre. I will admit that I did not grow up reading superheroes. I grew up, I kind of went from newspaper comics to Archie comics to heavy metal. Well, to undergrounds and then to heavy metal. And heavy metal is the thing I think that formed my tastes more than anything else. So I'm a big fan of the books that come from, you know, Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly, and Street Noise, and, you know, some of the more offbeat, you know, Domino books and Silver Sprocket, you know, just interesting. I'm a big fan of anything that's done by an independent, really, because you get such a sense of a personal voice and a personal vision. And I think it's kind of interesting that we're talking about Beyond Superheroes at DiversityCon, because if you go to a non-superhero focused convention like SPX or Mocha Fest or probably TCAF, which I've yet to get to, I'll get there one day. The diversity of creators on the tables and the diversity of the public doing the buying is endless. It's not really even an issue. You don't have to talk about diversity. It's just kind of a given. We really tend to talk about it more in the superhero genre. And that's like a whole separate issue.
So Ray, you talked a little bit about some genres you're going to be working in. Are there any other genres that you particularly like to work in?
Yeah. Fabrice actually inspired me when he had Noir, the new Black book out, and I was like, I should try to do a noir story, like noir meets superheroes. So, like,
This guy.
So during the pandemic, my pandemic project was because we saw each other right before the shutdown, right, Fabrice? Was it?
Yes, when you were in LA last year, absolutely.
Yeah, and then I had this. I'm not going to get into the drama of it, but basically, I had made a submission 15 years ago to a company, which will not be mentioned, but they ended up using the property 15 years later, and I made some complaints about it, and so sent them a cease and desist, and I trademarked the item during the shutdown. So I actually beat them to the punch with the trademark, and then I started writing a book, and it's a clown story. It's about a clown detective. So it's the new book is called Punchline Clown Detective, and it's 10 issues so far, and it's fun. It's like, it has noir. I love the circus. I mean, most people feel that clowns are creepy or scary. I always loved them as a kid. Maybe it's a generation gap, but I never thought clowns were scary at all. I never felt frightened by them, or so I was like, well, two things I love. I love the circus. I love, superheroes, and I love, like the old detective stories, like, like Humphrey Bogart, and I always like Chinatown with Jack Nicholson, and so I said, hey, I never did that type of comic, and when I saw how Fabrice was doing so successful with his his campaign, I was like, let me try it. But it's a clown.
It was only successful because of the wonderful 40 Black talents that I have on this book.
That's true. You're right.
And it's their thing. It's their show. And they are the ones that deserve all the kudos. I'm just holding the mic.
Yeah.
And which book is that?
I would say
Noirs
that's
in
not
Black.
total.
Okay.
Well, you did write it, right? You got to give yourself some credit.
Well, I would say that Fabrice, that's not giving yourself enough credit for one having the idea to bring these writers together in this kind of format, and it takes a lot of work. I mean, I've seen it, and it takes a lot of work to edit something like that. That's kudos to you. So I just throw this out. Yeah.
And shout out to my partner TC Harris on this,
Yes.
With whom I couldn't have completed this volume in 5 little months for 148 pages. That was really a challenge. So TC and myself, we edited Noirs Than You Black, and like, I have a scoop for you. There will be more Noirs Than You Black coming. So
great. Wonderful. So now I think is a good time for a question from the audience. We have a question from someone in the audience who asked, do you think that when we are talking about the notion of superheroes and the sort of damsel in distress that went along with those traditionally, that contributes to the conversation about gender norms? And I'd sort of like to build on that question that they asked and say, and how do you think that you're able to move beyond that when you're not working in the confines of the superhero genre? Do you think you have more ability to explore things that way when you're not in that confined environment?
Anyone can go, or
yeah,
I think the days of the damsel in distress have been long gone.
Most of the
Karen, did you want to go ahead?
I was just going to say most of the superhero publishers have kind of house policies, right? And you have to abide by certain guidelines and plot points that you're not given so very much freedom. So it seems fairly clear that once you get outside of the superhero cabal, you've got freedom to do whatever you want. And, as long as you can find a publisher, but with Kickstarter, you can find a public even without a formal publisher. So that's just the ultimate freedom. I'm thinking of a letter that Stan Lee wrote to Dennis Kitchen. We have the Kitchen Sink Press archives at Columbia, and it's got tens of thousands of letters that Dennis exchanged with everyone in comics. And he had sent some underground comics to Stan Lee in the early 70s. And Stan wrote back, literally, he was jealous of Dennis's freedom to do any story he wanted without any kind of constraints. So, I mean, that's going that far back, and from somebody that high up, acknowledging that you don't get to do whatever you want to do.
In the early 2000s,
I would say that there is.
Melody, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say from a reader and a writer perspective, I think there's comic books are moving into a place where women have more agency in a way that's beyond like a guy, which is something that you see it often in films, an action film with a woman and she's strong because she has a gun in her hand. There are other ways in which we can be strong, which is why in an Omni, the character that I write is super intelligent, and I love the idea of exploring that as a kind of a super strength. But I think also to have multi-ethnic characters, that's something that we're beginning to see. To have LGBTQ characters, I mean, we have Superman coming out as bisexual, and it's very controversial, and it's interesting how controversial that is. So I think there's still a long way to go. And then for me, when I was reading comic books, over the years, the sexualization of female characters in the way they look and the way they act, that has also transformed. In some places, I think, gone further than others, and where female characters and female writers have been able to own what that means and own that. But that's been problematic too. And I just really, I see things changing as people challenge, and as Karen said, as more independents get out there and get out their very unique voices, that's everyone else kind of has to kind of turn their heads and say, wait, there's a different way of doing this, and there are people willing to read those stories. So yeah,
I think the reason why, it's kind of funny, back in 1997 I did a comic book that was all the characters were either gay, lesbian, or bisexual, and the independent community, even though I was doing the Mocha show and selling the book, my peers in comics are like, why are you writing this? Why is this? Comic books is a boys club. That's why Superboy or Superman being bisexual is so controversial, because it's still a boys club. They're just an old boys club now. And there was like a shunning. There was like, no, we don't want to be associated with you because you do these types of books. So, like I said, the peer pressure of doing independent underground style comic books, and being ahead of your time sometimes, doesn't matter, because it's like you could be ahead of your time, but people don't recognize it. And now everyone's doing it. I'm like, maybe I should reprint those old books again. But I mean, the same thing you see with the rise of African American superheroes. You didn't really see a lot of DC and Marvel have African American superheroes, but a lot of them didn't have long-term titles. Like Black Lightning's been around since 1975, but he hasn't had a consistent running title like Superman that's run the span of time. They're basically retaining trademarks, and every time they have to renew a trademark or a copyright, they have to put out the title so they can retain the control of it. That's the only reason why you see milestones, 5th anniversary, 10th anniversary, 15th anniversary. Those are basically following the trademark trends of when you have to renew a trademark. And most people get deceived and thinking, oh, we're having more representation, but it really isn't. It's really about control and controlling the market and controlling and keeping those characters away from the creators who would, in a sense, like the writer who got back his rights for Ghost Rider because they slept on the trademark and he retained that. It's more for corporate means. The same thing with, it's good to see diversity in comics today, but I really wonder, is it just based on getting a younger demographic because of the Yaoi comics? You have young people reading Yaoi for 15, 20 years in America, young kids reading these, pro-gay comic books. And the Boys Club always shunned those books, but now they're jumping on it because they're losing their readers. Their readers are getting older. Their readers are no longer interested in buying what was already read, since mostly what they write is regurgitated stuff from the good books that were written 25 years ago. So I wonder if it's just a political move of just trying to capitalize and become competitive with the manga market that has dominated literally the world. I don't think that they're genuinely interested in representation. Kind of like when they had the Puerto Rican superhero vibe, but he had a Mexican vernacular in the 80s and 90s. I think it's insincere, but it's good that it's happening. And I see that maybe there's people from the inside working to change that voice. And I think that's important too. So it's not to reject it, but definitely to criticize it, because you want to know what's the real intention. Is this just for marketing purposes, or is this actually for true representation and the true voice of people who are, LGBTQ AI?
May I say something?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
First, you have to realize that corporate comics are different than the rest of the comics. And corporate comics are there because we're not in the same. I always say that we're not in the same business. The Marvels and the DCs and us, we're not in the same business. They're in the business of perpetuating their brands, and they will go as far as they can to achieve that, and that's fine. That it's not a good or a bad thing. That is what it is. It's their business. They're perpetuating brand, and if they reinterpret old stories and redo it and retool it and reinvent it, and if they're doing 50 Captain America, because why not? Everyone needs a Captain America. That's their thing. But our business is to telling real and authentic stories that come from the hearts of the creators. Creators are the heart of this business, and we can't let go. So the more diverse creators we have, and let me tell you good news. I've been to art schools, and I've been to places like SCAD, for example. I've been like many years there, and every year I could see the faces of the students. They're not the boys club. 99% women, for starters. A lot of LGBTQ, a lot of diversity, a lot of people from all around the world. These people want to stay in our industry. They want to break into our industry and stay in. Welcome. Welcome, because their voices needs to be heard. And let me tell you a personal story. 6 years ago, I did a book called Intertwined that I'm re-releasing next week, actually. At the time when we did the book 6 years ago, there's an LGBTQ love story baked in the middle of it. The publisher didn't know how to sell this because it was a kung fu noir diverse book with an LGBTQ story in the middle of it and a love story between a Black man and an Asian man. And I didn't know how to sell it. And as a matter of fact, it stayed on the fringe. But every time I was showing up at a convention, it was my biggest seller. So I was like, when I get my rights back, I'm going to show them how it's done. And right now, we reintroduced the book with a new cover and all, and going through Diamond as Fair Square Comics, my publisher. And the sales are extremely strong already. The times have changed. Now selling those stories are normal. It's normal. It's part of a thing. But it was always there. It was just a little more subtle back in the day. And now we can be more in the open. We have to keep pushing doors, keep crushing doors until all voices are heard and all creators are understood. And also all creators are paid.
Yes.
Yeah.
And and because I wonder to what extent there's a lot of crossover between TV and film. I mean, obviously Black Panther. I mean, and it all feeding back and forth like a loop across. We see on television, you see a lot more diversity now than you ever have, and in fact, there's been some groundbreaking stories and characters, and I think that changes the expectations that the audience has, and then they want to say, well, why don't we have more of that? And that opens the door a little bit, and then the same with with comic books as well, opening the doors for what audiences are wanting to see and have a taste for, willing to say, well, why not? I think that's that. You said what if? I said for me it's why not. That's also another way I have of looking at right.
Definitely. So how do you think that having this increase in diversity of the stories that are being told, but also of the creators, is changing the industry? Do you think it's having an effect on the larger businesses, on the superhero markets, on the larger indie publishers, or is that still something that's not changing much?
I could say that as an indie publisher, even when you're getting picked up, like I was at Arsenal Pulp Press, still the book was in Diamond.
Oh, Ray, you're a little quiet.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Still quite quiet.
Hold on. How's that? I don't know where the mic is here. How about that? Is that
better? Yeah.
Okay. I think I had to tilt it up. So dealing as an indie publisher, you still, even though you're dealing with a publishing company, you're still really self-promoting the book. Like I still had to, even though it was in Diamond and it was being distributed internationally, I still had to call comic book stores, like 500-600 comic book stores. I kept calling from state to state just to get people to pick up the book, because no one really knows about it, even though it's in Diamond. Most people that I know don't buy a Diamond book, and most readers don't buy Diamond and look through it. It's only like store owners or people who are collectors of collecting certain statues or something. So it's still a grind of having to reach out and play Glenn Ross and try to sell your book like you're selling real estate properties. It's like and then getting paid, like Fabrice said, is true too, because Arsenal Pulp Press is an LGBTQ creator content publisher, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be honest with you. So getting paid is a major thing. So because of the pandemic, when my book came out, was in April of 2020. They basically called it a loss. They said all their books for 2020 were losses, so we don't have to pay you guys, even though they have a 5-year contract with me. So, but the money that they owe me, the $10K that they owe me, versus having a lawyer and paying him $5,000 every 3 months, it doesn't really equate. So you just have to chalk it up as a loss, because are you going to go to international court and fight them in Canada, or even if you fight them here, you're still the only one that's going to win is the lawyers. So even as a creator, we still have hurdles. Even if they are people who so-called represent you and represent your identity as to who you are, they're still publishers at the end of the day. They might be inclusive, they might be LGBTQIA, but at the same time, they're still a company, and they're still going to screw you out of not out of paying you and using any excuse for it. So yeah, that's a challenge.
You can't generalize, Ray. You know that.
No, I'm not generalizing, but I'm just talking about my own personal experience. That's my own personal experience as a publisher, like, as an indie publisher. That's what I've been experiencing. Not getting people to, sign the check after they made, it's been a year and a half, and they've made tons of money in the book. It's been reviewed, but they will not write a check. They basically said, we're not going to pay you. We're breaking our contract. So
I'm wondering what people see as challenges then maybe that still need to be worked on in the industry. Are there specific steps you think would help to support more different types of stories being heard and being seen by the right audiences?
Marketing.
Okay.
It seems like the biggest diversity is in self-publishing, and getting those self-published creators into a more standard traditional framework with a publisher and with book contracts. That's going to push the diversity of the medium.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. That's what I'm doing.
I assume we're still talking about. I'm sorry, what was that?
I think Fabrice is doing the right thing by doing the Kickstarter creator content controlled, rather than a middleman. I think the middleman is being phased out, and I think the publishers are just realizing that Kickstarter and Indiegogo is a threat to them.
You are right, and ownership is the final frontier. And that's why at my company, I and pardon the pun, I color coded the ownership. Like on the cover of the books, you can see who owns what with a color system. And if you look at Noir is the New Black has a purple logo on it. The purple logo means that every creator in the book keeps their own rights and can do whatever they want. Melody can attest that she has the rights to Igbo Landing forever, and it's not mine. I'm just very lucky to publish it through one book. But it's and instead of doing standard publishing contracts, if we do licensing deals with creators, we're just borrowing we pay a fee to borrow their creation for a single project, and that's it. And it's very clean, and it's very good, and no one has ever to be bothered about ownership. And when you see a green logo on my books, it's because I own the rights, and that's okay. I mean, why a lot of publishers, unfortunately, are still taking a chunk of the IPs of the creators, because they say, oh, this is what we want. We need to take the media rights, or we need to take this part of the publishing rights, or we need to take this thing. I think that is completely wrong. When you are a creator, or when you are a publisher, you should pride yourself in letting the creators do what they want, as long as it fits your editorial mandate. And there's no way in trying to. It's cheap to take a chunk of what the creators want. A company, you can explain as a publisher, you can explain to your talent that you need to live too, and you will take a chunk of what's coming back, but it's going to be very transparent. And it's going to be very honest, and that's what every publisher should do. I mean, everyone is free to do whatever they want, but that's my way.
So I'd actually like to ask a
Fabrice,
follow-up question
I
on
want to
that.
say something about your point.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
I just wanted to address your point about Kickstarter taking out the middleman, which is absolutely true. It allows so much more control. The drawback, as somebody who buys as much for my collection as I possibly can, the drawback is discoverability. How do you find the Kickstarter for the book that you want? If it's published by a publisher who has a specific kind of profile, you go to the publisher's website, you see what their title list is. Kickstarter, I follow people on Twitter, I follow people on Facebook, I follow people on Instagram, just waiting for, I follow the Beats crowdsourcing roundup, because I'm trying to find out what is out there on Kickstarter. And I'm always learning that I've missed something that I really, really wanted to have. So that's, the one drawback.
I have
you
an
do
answer
have
for
that
you.
Power and that control. Oh, great.
I have an answer for you, and because this industry needs curation, and it's impossible to get the 300 Kickstarters a week that you have, with sometimes great comics and sometimes terrible comics. And if you add, now you have like new actors. You have Zoop, which is a new actor in crowdfunding. You have Indiegogo, which has been increasingly opening their doors to creators, even if Kickstarter remains the main driving force. And I'm not counting the other crowdfunding platforms from other countries like France and the UK and Italy and Spain. They have different crowdfunding platforms. You need curation.
Bank.
Kiss Bank, absolutely, or Ulule or whatever. You have a lot of those.
Right.
There needs curation. That's why beyond that and beyond the website, I decided to create a magazine, because at one point you need to discover those people. I created a magazine in the spring that I kickstarted. That's the irony, called Mutiny, and in Mutiny, which will be distributed online and in stores starting November 24th, everywhere. The concept is very simple.
Great.
It's mainstream and independent comics under the same roof.
That's great. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Currently, I'm working on a project with Trevor Von Eden. We are reading an old series from a decade ago called The Greatest Hero, Black Power, which takes the Black Power movement, the Civil Rights movement, and the trials of Muhammad Ali, and under the guise of superheroics. So you have this major historical thing that happened in America to Black Americans, but to attract those superhero readers, we've turned them all into superheroes. So it's an alternate universe. And it's pretty amazing to see, the creator of Black Lightning, getting back. I mean, he's better than ever. He's like wine gets finer with age. I would say that Trevor has, he was a master already. So he's like, he's Picasso'd himself, like it became even a greater master with his artwork. I mean, when you're at the top already, I mean, I don't know how high you can, what the word would be for, but he's just phenomenal. And it was our new marriage together for the next few issues. So number 5 is coming out in December, and we're already working on number 6. So
Great.
Yes.
Fabrice, I want to go back to something that you mentioned a question or so ago about sort of the contracts and keeping your rights. So what advice, in this setting, we're talking a lot probably to students who are attending. What advice do you have somebody who's starting out in the comics industry when it comes to that? And I would be interested in hearing that from everyone's perspective. What was some advice you wish you'd heard when you were starting out generally, but then also specifically about contract and rights type issues, which I'm not sure people always necessarily know about when they're first starting out?
That's an excellent question. I would say that the best and the worst thing that happened to me was to sign my first publishing deal with Marvel Comics. When you sign a deal with Marvel Comics, which was a 70-page big ass contract, you basically waive your rights to everything. You abandon every right to contest or to sue them or do anything. And of course, a lot of people are not informed that when they see my character, Spider-Man Noir, on screen at McDonald's in a Happy Meal or anywhere, I don't get a dime. I don't get anything. I don't touch anything. And I was like very modestly compensated for my stint on the series because I accepted it, because it was my foot in the door, and because I knew that when you work for these big companies, this is a corporate world where the corporation owns the character, and you have to dance that dance. Now, it was the first and the last time that I accepted a contract like this. So the first thing that you have to do when you're a young creator is learn how to read. Learn how to read a contract. Learn how to understand the verbiage, because it's very complex sometimes to understand. So you have to ask the right questions. So when you ask the right questions, you limit the ways that the publishers can take advantage of you. The other thing that you have to pay attention to, and especially in the modern world, is what I call the creator-owned syndrome. The creator-owned syndrome is that creator-owned is a beautiful idea, but some publishers have tried to pervert it by saying, oh, this is creator-owned, meaning you own the characters, but everything that is produced belongs to the publisher. Wrong.
That's horrible.
Or they will say, we're going to take these rights for ourselves, and you have all the publishing rights. But since the publishing is controlled by the publisher, then they will release the book or not release the book, and you will have the right on something that virtually is absent. Or you had a publisher that will not name, because fortunately it's a publisher that is on his way out, which had creators sign the rights to their characters. It was supposedly creator owned, but the publishing rights were exclusive to the publisher in perpetuity, which is wrong. So the first thing is learn how to read a contract. The longer the contract, the fishier it is. You have to pay attention to everything you sign. Having a book on shelves that your mother can go and buy because you make her very proud is not enough to sign a contract like this. You have to pay attention. Your future is at stake as a young creator. You can't let that happen. That's why I encourage all publishers to do what I do, which is signing licensing deal. Because in licensing deals, it's extremely clear. It's 2 or 3 pages contract, and you never have a question about ownership, because there's no ownership. It's just the publisher is a user. It's like when you're going to Apple streaming services or Netflix, you're a user. You don't own anything. You're using it. Okay. So it's the same thing in publishing. If the publisher becomes a user, and the owner remains the creator, there's no problem.
Great.
Learn how to read.
Anybody else want to talk about advice for creators trying to get their foot in the door?
Yeah, I was always copywriting since age 19, and then trademarking for the last since 2010. So I would say it does make a big deal. Fabrice is correct. All my properties that I've created and protected are still mine. I know people that were very successful in the industry, created very iconic characters, but they don't own them. They would love to write more stories with those characters, but the company won't allow them to. Even that they have great ideas for these characters that they created, but they're not given the priority to continue their stories. It's like for a select few, you know, and that's a shame. I feel that do it yourself. Distribution is key. Marketing, like Karen and Fabrice said, is super important. Reinventing yourself, but at the end of the day, whether you're with a publisher or doing it on your own, you're going to be working hard, regardless of whichever route you take. It's going to be hard work. It's not an easy stroll, and it doesn't matter if it's a Latinx book with a Latin company, or an African American company, or an American company, or an LGBTQ company. Read your contract, like Fabrice was saying. You know.
Great. Melody, how about you?
Yeah,
Definitely.
I would add, I'm kind of in this weird nexus of things changing for it to be more creator directed. So my first contract, I had partial rights, and I was really happy to work on Noir is the New Black, because there was a story that I had a lot of passion for and that I want to develop into a larger work. And so you can put that idea out there in some form, knowing that you own that. And so that gives a variety of stories that can be out there. But I would add that it's, not everybody can read legal wording and figure it out. So there are places where you can consult with lawyers sometimes for free. They'll give you some information. I would say it's worth it to even pay a small fee to a lawyer to have them walk you through one of your first contracts. So that'll be kind of a template for you in understanding the verbiage, because it's not always easy to understand everything. And some of the contracts are, as Fabrice said, some of them are longer. And then you have ancillary rights. I mean, I have work that is being looked at for a TV show. I want to know what those ancillary rights what that means. So you want to know about the life of the work beyond just the publishing of the comic book, because that's where a lot of money can be made, and you don't want to leave that on the table. And I think it's a crime that Fabrice is not being remunerated for Spider-Man, Noir. It breaks my heart, and it's not right, and it shouldn't happen. So knowing, and all my TV and my film contracts, I can tell you, I have a 40-page contract for one of my. I read it, and I don't understand all of it, and I have to sometimes consult and ask. I keep notes. I'm like, what the hell does that mean? What is this clause? But it's your business. You think of it as a business, and you should know your business.
Definitely, I think that's great advice. So we're in the last few minutes, but we have another audience question about advice for people specifically who are interested in publishing work independently. So as people who have worked in that area, what would you say are some tips you would have for approaching that type of work specifically and trying to get your foot in the door for doing independent publishing?
Just do it. Just do it. There's nothing. I mean, honestly, it was a long time ago, but when I decided, hey, I want to do my own comic books, there was an editor, I forget his name. I think it was Tom DeFalco in 1999 at a convention. I think it was Tom DeFalco. He just told me, your work is great, but it's not mainstream, and no one's going to pick it up, so do it yourself. And that's all I needed to hear. And then I've been doing it myself ever since. That's all there is to it. Do it. Turn off the television. Stop spending your money on Amazon and all these corporations. Stop spending your money on Marvel and DC, and invest all those dollars, your own dollars, into your own creation. And that's what I started doing. I'm not saying boycott them, but really invest the lion's share of your income towards producing your product until you could find a sponsor, which I did when I was still living in the Bronx. I had the Bronx Council of the Arts. They were one of my first sponsors for publishing, even though it was creator-owned, by doing community-based events like the Bronx Heroes Comic-Con. I was able to do what I love, create comics, and at the same time educate people through workshops, through the public library and the Parks Department, and then I got other grants like Bloomberg and NISCA and NIFA, and that's a rare thing where, once you become a community organizer and start doing things for the community, and it's about comics, the things that you love, then they actually started funding my book and putting it out there. So I'd put whenever they published or sponsored a book, their logo went on the book,
Okay.
So there's more than one way to skin a cat, as they say,
Any other advice for people interested in independently publishing their works?
I
want to say.
I get asked a lot.
Sorry, Karen. Go.
reasons that-
Go ahead. Karen.
I have to go. I'm sorry. Thank you,
I get
everybody.
asked a lot for reasons that are not clear to me. Bye, Ray. I get asked a lot for reasons that aren't clear to me because I'm a librarian. Like, how can I get an agent, or how can I get published? And I had a woman. Finally, one day, a woman said to me, "My son just graduated from the Kubert School, and he's really good. How can he get an agent?" And I said, "I don't know." But then I went to an agent friend of mine, and I said, "Listen, I'm not sending these people to you, but I want to know, what should I tell them? What is your advice?" And the agent said to me two things. One, tell them they don't need an agent, they need an editor, because an editor will not only get their material in shape for a publisher, but will prove that they know how to work with an editor. So that was the first piece of advice. And the second was social media. Build a social media profile, build a social media following, because when publishers see that you've got potentially 10,000 sales just waiting to happen, they're more likely to roll the dice on you. So that's what I've got.
Fabrice, did you have something? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to like double down on what Karen and Ray said. You have to invest on yourself, that's for sure. And to those who want to pitch themselves to the big studios, they still can. But my best advice would be go out and do it yourself. And if you're attractive and good enough, they will find you. They will want you. You have to morph yourself into a salesperson of yourself.
Yep.
Because you're the person that you have the best interest in defending. So you have to become a salesperson. I was a very shy kid when I was in my 20s and before that, and I had to become a salesperson. I had to go to conventions to sell my stuff, to convince people that what I wanted to, what I was doing was great. And this, you have to love people. You have to be able to sell yourself. And if you can't do it live, do it through social media or hire someone who can do it for you. But you should invest on yourself, 100%.
Agree.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
My name is Ramon Gillan.
Hi, Ramon.
I organize Diversity Comic Con here at FIT, and I want to thank all the speakers, Ray included, for coming today. Carli and I work together at FIT, and Karen's also an educator. And Fabrice and I go back a long way, and Ray and I hang out once in a while. And Melody, it was a pleasure meeting you for this.
Same.
And I know
same
that
here.
you have a hard if everybody could just, I know you're at home. Well, actually, I do this in my classes. I tell people to clap, but thank you very much for coming out.
And really quickly, I saw a question from an FIT student in the chat about the FIT Library's comic collection. And so I just wanted to say that I want to encourage students to recommend books that they would like us to consider purchasing. And I would also like to say that we can borrow from all the different SUNY schools. So if you are interested in getting any particular book, feel free to stop by and we're happy to help you. And thank you all for coming today. It was really great to hear you.
5 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
very much,
Carli.
guys.
Bye.
Oh, by the way,
Bye.
I'd like to say before the rest of the audience leaves, we do have a few announcements to make. We do have a raffle. So at the homepage of Diversity Comic Con, there is a link on the top that says contact. So if you set the third person who emails me with the word Beyond Superheroes in the subject line, the third person gets a $20 Amazon gift certificate and a copy of this book, which we put out last year from the Comic-Con, from Diversity Comic-Con. Okay, so that is our raffle prize for this hour. So the third person who emails me from the link, the contact link at the top of the Diversity Comic-Con website gets the prize. Now, so before I go, I want to say one more thing. A lot of people kept asking about how do I get started? How do I become a comic book creator or whatever? How do I self-publish? At 5 o'clock, we are having another panel discussion, and it's exactly the topic, how to self-publish your comic. So come out to that at 5 o'clock. Come back to the Diversity Comic Con website, and you will see it. You will see the link right there in the panel section. So thank you very much all for coming. Carli, thank you for suggesting this panel topic and for moderating. Okay.
Thanks.
Take care. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Karen. Karen, we got to meet in person one of these days.
I know, right? This is crazy.
Right.
We'll make it happen. Take
And
care.
Carli, I'll see you around the library.
See you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.